Rain was pounding on that tin roof like it was angry at the world when John closed his wife's suitcase with trembling hands. Linda stood there, firm as an oak tree facing down a storm, and whispered just one question that would echo for months. Why, John? After everything we built together? From the next room, Evelyn's cough rang out like a bitter victory bell. My mother needs me. She's sick. I can't leave her alone. The door shut. Linda stood alone in the pouring rain. No home, no answers. But what John didn't know was that inside that locked shed were yellowed letters from his late father. Letters that would reveal a secret so devastating it would shatter everything he believed about himself. And by the time he finally discovered the truth about who he really was, it would be too late to undo the pain he'd caused the only woman who'd ever truly loved him. Rain was coming down hard that night, I mean really hard, the kind that pounds on a tin roof like it's angry at the world. Each drop sliding down the window of that modest farmhouse looked just like the tears Linda was holding back inside. She stood there, watching her husband John with trembling hands, stuffing her clothes into that old suitcase, and Lord, the look on his face, it was like watching a man being torn apart from the inside. Love, duty, fear, all of it fighting inside him at once. Linda didn't fall to her knees, didn't beg. She just stood there, firm as an oak tree, staring at what was coming, and all she could whisper was, "Why, John, after everything we built together?" From the next room, his mother Evelyn's cough echoed through the house like some kind of bitter victory bell. John swallowed hard, pushing down his own sobs, and said what he'd been rehearsing in his head for days. "My mother needs me. She's sick. I can't leave her alone." The door shut with a sound that felt final as a gravestone. Outside, under that pouring rain, Linda gripped her suitcase tight, so tight her knuckles went white, and looked up at the gray sky. Her faith, the one thing that had always held her up, felt shattered right then, broken into pieces like that thunder ripping through the night. She was alone now, completely alone, standing there in the rain, no home to go back to, no arms to hold her. Just a suitcase full of clothes and a heart that felt like it had been ripped clean out of her chest. Where was she gonna go? How do you even start over when the person you loved most in this world just chose someone else? How do you rebuild when even your heart's been torn away? The rain kept falling. Linda kept standing there, and somewhere inside that house, Evelyn smiled in the darkness, knowing she'd won. But what nobody knew yet, not John, not Evelyn, not even Linda herself, was that this rain-soaked night was just the beginning of a story that would uncover secrets buried so deep they'd shake the very foundation of everything they thought they knew. What happens when a woman loses everything? Where does she find the strength to take that first step into the unknown? Linda ended up in a tiny back room that her old friend Sarah offered her. The walls had cracks running through them like rivers on a map, and the space was so small you could touch both walls if you stretched out your arms. But it was all she had now, and she was grateful for even that. The nights, oh Lord, the nights were the hardest part. They stretched out long and empty, filled with nothing but the whistle of wind through those cracks and the cruel silence of being completely alone. Linda would lie there on that narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and the emptiness felt like it was swallowing her whole. Back at the farm, things were different. Evelyn was thriving, you know. She had her son's full attention now, every single bit of it, and she was loving every minute. John devoted himself to her like she was the only person left in the world, made her meals, fluffed her pillows, sat by her bedside reading to her for hours. But then something happened that made John's heart skip a beat. He was tidying up one day, organizing the drawers in his mother's room like he always did, when his hand bumped against something in the back, a medicine bottle. He pulled it out and froze right there. It was nearly full, almost completely full. His mind raced back to just 3 days earlier, when Evelyn had sworn up and down that she'd run out of this exact medication. She'd been coughing so bad that night, clutching her chest, saying, "John, honey, I'm out of pills. I need you to drive to town first thing in the morning." And he had. He'd driven 40 minutes each way to get her refill, worried sick the whole time. But here it was, the old bottle barely touched, hidden in the back of her drawer. John stood there holding that bottle, his hands starting to shake. His heart was pounding so hard, he could hear it in his ears. Was it just forgetfulness? Maybe she'd misplaced it and genuinely didn't remember. Or was it something else? Something he didn't want to think about. He thought about saying something, opening his mouth and just asking her straight out. But fear wrapped around his throat like a chain. What if he seemed ungrateful? What if she really was sick and confused, and he made her feel terrible for a simple mistake? So he said nothing, just put the bottle back where he found it, and walked out of that room with doubt eating away at his insides. Was his mother truly as sick as she claimed? Or had John just found the first crack in a carefully built facade? And if she was lying about the medicine, what else might Evelyn be hiding? Linda knew she couldn't just sit in that tiny room forever, staring at cracked walls and drowning in her own thoughts. She needed work, needed something to fill her hands and quiet her mind. So when Sarah mentioned that Mrs. Margaret, a sweet church-going woman from town, was looking for help with her garden, Linda jumped at the chance. The work was hard, real hard. Linda wasn't used to this kind of labor, spending hours on her knees in the dirt under the hot sun. Her hands, which had once been soft from cooking and keeping house, now blistered and bled as she pulled weeds and turned soil. Mrs. Margaret would watch her sometimes with this gentle but steady gaze, like she could see right through to Linda's broken heart. One afternoon, as Linda was planting seeds with trembling, blistered hands, Mrs. Margaret came and sat down beside her on the ground. She didn't say anything at first, just watched Linda work. Then, soft as a whisper, she said, "My dear, God plants flowers even in the driest soil. Sometimes it's in humiliation that strength takes root to uphold the soul." Linda stopped digging. Those words hit her right in the chest, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying right there. Mrs. Margaret reached over and gently touched Linda's raw, blistered hands. "These hands are learning strength, honey. Every bit of pain you're feeling right now, it's not punishment, it's preparation." From that day on, something shifted inside Linda. Every seed she planted felt like a silent prayer she was sending up to heaven. She'd press each tiny seed into the dark earth and whisper, "Lord, let something good grow from this pain." And you know what? The earth answered back. Slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice at first. Little green shoots started pushing up through the soil, life coming from what looked like nothing. Linda would kneel there in the garden, dirt under her fingernails, sweat on her brow, and feel something she hadn't felt since that rainy night when John closed the door on her: hope. Her heart, which had felt dead and buried, was starting to bloom again, just like those flowers pushing up toward the sun. But with that new strength came something else. Questions. Questions she'd been too heartbroken to ask before. Why had John really sent her away? Was Evelyn truly as sick as she claimed? Would this new strength be enough for Linda to finally turn the page and move on? Or would it drive her to dig deeper, to uncover the hidden truth behind her expulsion, no matter what painful secrets she might find? Back at the farm, John's life had become something he barely recognized. He wasn't living like a son anymore, more like a servant, running around trying to meet every single one of his mother's demands. And Lord, those demands just kept growing. Evelyn would ask for breakfast, then push the plate away saying it was too cold, so John would make it again. Then she'd say it was too salty, so he'd make it a third time, his hands shaking with frustration he couldn't show. She'd tell stories about his childhood, but if John remembered things differently, she'd get this cold look in her eyes and say, "No, honey, you're confused. It happened my way." Like she was erasing his own memories right in front of him. And the silences. Oh, the silences were the worst. Sometimes Evelyn wouldn't speak to him for hours, just to punish him for some small thing he'd done wrong. John would sit there, desperate to fix whatever he'd broken, not even sure what it was. He was exhausted, worn down to nothing. Then one Tuesday afternoon, while John was fixing the fence out front, old Mr. Patterson from the neighboring farm stopped by to chat. "Hey, John," he said, leaning against the fence post. "I saw your mother at the market yesterday. She was laughing with the ladies, walking around strong as a young woman. Good to see her feeling better, huh?" John froze. His hammer stopped mid-swing. The market? Yesterday? His mind raced back to just yesterday morning. Evelyn had spent the entire day in bed, coughing so hard it sounded like her lungs were going to give out. She'd clutched his hand and whispered weakly, "John, I'm too frail to even sit up. Could you bring me some water, sweetheart?" He'd tiptoed around the house all day, afraid to make noise that might disturb her rest. But she'd been at the market, laughing, walking around strong. "Yeah," John managed to say, his voice sounding hollow. "Good to hear." Mr. Patterson tipped his hat and walked off, leaving John standing there with that hammer hanging loose in his hand. The doubt that had been whispering in the back of his mind since he found that medicine bottle, it wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. That night, John knelt by his bed and prayed like he hadn't prayed in months. "Lord," he whispered into the darkness, "have I been blind? Have I been so afraid of losing her that I couldn't see what was right in front of me?" The question hung in the air, heavy as stone, and somewhere in the house, Evelyn slept peacefully, not knowing that the carefully built walls around her son were finally starting to crack. Would John finally dare to confront his mother with the truth? Or would guilt and fear keep him chained, too afraid to face what he might discover? Linda had started going to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings to pick up supplies for Mrs. Margaret's garden. The fresh air and busy crowds helped quiet the ache in her chest, at least for a little while. She was examining some tomato plants when she heard a voice behind her, rough and worn, like old leather. "Linda? That you, child?" She turned around and there stood Samuel, the former farmhand who'd worked on John's farm for years before his back gave out. His face was weathered, deep lines carved around his eyes, and those eyes, Lord, they carried something heavy, something he'd been holding on to for too long. "Samuel," Linda said, her voice catching, "it's good to see you." They moved away from the crowded stalls, finding a quiet spot under an old oak tree. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "You've been strong, child," he said, "stronger than most would have been in your shoes." Linda's throat tightened. "I'm trying." Samuel hesitated, like he was wrestling with whether to speak or stay silent. Then he sighed deep and said, "Evelyn has always been this way. Always." Linda's heart started pounding. "She did the same thing to John's late father," Samuel continued, his voice dropping lower. "Controlled even the air that man breathed. I watched it happen over the years, watched her tighten her grip until there was nothing left of him but a shadow." The words hit Linda like cold water. She'd known Evelyn was controlling, but this was something else entirely. Samuel looked around, making sure nobody was listening, then leaned closer. "There are secrets buried in that house, Linda. Secrets even the master couldn't bear without pain." "What kind of secrets?" Linda whispered, her hands trembling. But Samuel just shook his head. "I've said too much already. Just know this. If you're looking for answers about why you were cast out, they're not going to be simple ones. That woman has been hiding things for longer than John's been alive." He squeezed her shoulder gently, then walked away, disappearing into the market crowd. Linda stood there under that oak tree, her mind racing. The word secrets echoed inside her head like a warning bell, like thunder before a storm. What had Evelyn done? What was she still hiding? And if John's own father couldn't escape her control, what chance did John have now? Linda looked back toward where the farm would be, miles away, and for the first time since that rainy night, she felt something besides heartbreak. She felt determination. What were those secrets Samuel spoke of? Could Evelyn's past hold the key to understanding everything? And could Linda find the courage to uncover truths that might destroy what little remained? After that conversation with Mr. Patterson, and after all those nights spent praying for clarity, John knew he couldn't keep living in this fog. He needed answers. Real answers. There was one place on the farm he'd never been allowed to touch, the old shed out back. His father's shed. Evelyn had locked it up years ago, right after his father passed, and told John to never go in there. Too painful, she'd said. Too many memories. But now, standing in front of that rusted padlock, John felt something shift inside him. He grabbed the bolt cutters from the barn and with shaking hands cut through that lock like he was breaking chains. The door creaked open and the smell hit him first. Rust, damp wood, and years of dust. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the walls, lighting up particles floating in the air like tiny ghosts. In the corner sat an old trunk covered in cobwebs. John knelt down and opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in his father's handwriting. With trembling fingers, John picked up the first one and started reading. It was like hearing his father's voice from beyond the grave, not speaking to the dead, just reading words left behind, words that had been buried for too long. The letters told stories of loneliness so deep it made John's chest ache. His father wrote about manipulation, about how Evelyn would invent illnesses to keep him from going anywhere, from seeing anyone, about how she'd guilt him every single time he tried to leave the house. She said her heart was failing, one letter read. Begged me not to take that job in the city. I stayed. 3 months later, I saw her dancing in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. John's hands shook harder as he kept reading, but it was one line, one single line in the last letter, that pierced through him like a knife. The cruelest prison has no bars, only blackmail. John dropped the letter like it had burned him. His breathing came fast and shallow. Everything Linda had tried to tell him before he sent her away, it was all true. "Oh God," he whispered, pressing his hands against his face. "What have I done?" Guilt crushed down on his chest so hard he could barely breathe. He'd cast out his wife, the woman he loved because his mother had played the exact same game she'd played on his father, and he'd fallen for it. Every single lie. John sat there on that dusty shed floor, surrounded by his father's words, and wept like he hadn't wept since he was a child. The letters revealed a devastating pattern. But was there something even more shocking hidden in those pages? What other truth was waiting to shatter everything John thought he knew? John sat there in that dusty shed, surrounded by his father's letters, thinking he'd already discovered the worst of it. But there was one more letter at the bottom of the trunk. The paper was more yellowed than the others, the handwriting shakier, like his father's hand had been trembling as he wrote. John almost didn't read it, almost put it back, but something made him unfold that fragile paper. The first line made his heart stop. I need to write this down before I lose the courage. John needs to know the truth about where he came from. John's hands started shaking so bad, he could barely hold the letter steady enough to read. His father wrote about Evelyn's younger sister, a woman named Catherine. Beautiful, kind Catherine, who'd fallen in love with a man who disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant. Catherine had been so scared, so alone, and Evelyn had taken her in, promising to help raise the baby. But Catherine died during childbirth. The labor was too hard, too long, and when it was over, there was only a crying newborn and a grief-stricken Evelyn. Evelyn couldn't have children of her own, the letter continued. The doctors had told her years before, so when Catherine died, Evelyn saw it as, and these were her own words, God giving me what I was denied. She claimed John as her son, registered him under her name, told everyone he was hers. John's vision blurred with tears. She's lived in fear ever since, his father wrote. Fear that John would find out and leave her. Fear that she'd be alone again. That fear, it's what's driven everything. Every manipulation, every lie, every invented illness. She wasn't trying to control us out of cruelty, son. She was terrified of abandonment. The letter fell from John's hands. He collapsed to his knees right there on that shed floor, his whole body shaking, and whispered into the empty air, My God, my whole life has been a lie. Everything he thought he knew about himself, gone. His mother wasn't his mother. His aunt, buried in the town cemetery, was the woman who'd actually given birth to him. And Evelyn, the woman he'd sacrificed his marriage for, the woman he'd devoted his entire life to, had built their whole relationship on a secret. John pressed his forehead against the cold floor and sobbed. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so deep inside him he didn't know it existed. Who was he? If his whole identity had been built on a lie, then who was John really? How does a man rebuild himself when the very foundation of his life crumbles to dust? And now that John knows the truth, what will he do with it? John didn't know how long he stayed in that shed. Hours, maybe. When he finally walked back to the house, the sun was setting, painting the sky blood red. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup like it was just another normal evening. She looked up when he came in, and her face shifted into that familiar expression, weak, frail, needing him. John, honey, where have you been? I was getting worried. Stop. His voice came out flat, dead. He placed the letters on the kitchen table between them. Evelyn's eyes went to those yellowed pages, and John watched the color drain from her face. Why, Mother? The question came out heavy, carrying the same weight Linda's voice had carried that rainy night when she'd asked him why he was sending her away. Why did you lie to me my entire life? Evelyn opened her mouth, and John waited for the cough, for the hand pressed to her chest, for the weak voice saying she wasn't strong enough for this conversation, but it didn't come. Instead, she just stood there, and for the first time in John's life, he saw her mask slip completely away. No coughs, no trembling hands, no excuses. What he saw in her eyes wasn't weakness. It was fear, raw, desperate fear. I was alone, she finally whispered. Catherine was all I had, and when she died, her voice cracked. I couldn't lose you too. You were all I had left of her, all I had left of anything. So you lied? For 30 years you lied. I was terrified, Evelyn said, and tears started rolling down her face. Real tears, maybe the first real tears John had ever seen from her. Terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd leave, that you'd hate me for keeping it from you, that I'd end up alone, with nothing, with no one. John stared at this woman who'd raised him, this woman who wasn't his mother at all, and he saw her clearly for the first time. Not frail, not weak, just desperately, achingly alone, and so scared of losing him that she'd built a prison for both of them. You cast out my wife, John said, his voice breaking. You made me choose between you and Linda, and I chose wrong. I chose the lie over the truth. Evelyn's carefully built castle, the one made of fake illnesses and guilt and manipulation, it all came crashing down right there in that kitchen. She sank into a chair, no longer the powerful woman pulling strings, just a scared person who'd let fear destroy everything good around her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." But John couldn't respond. He just stood there, holding those letters, wondering how he was ever going to forgive himself for what he'd done to Linda. Truth sets you free, but it also destroys everything built on lies. Now that John knows, will he find the strength to face Linda and beg for forgiveness? John left the farm the next morning, not running away, not fleeing from the mess he'd discovered, but leaving to rebuild himself from the ground up. He'd spent the whole night praying, asking God for the strength to face what he'd done. Evelyn didn't try to stop him. She just watched from the porch, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her, and for once, she let him go without a word. It took John 2 days to find Linda. He asked around town, followed leads until someone told him she was working at Mrs. Margaret's place tending the garden. When he pulled up to that house and saw her there in the garden, his breath caught in his throat. Linda was kneeling in the dirt, planting flowers, and there was something different about her. Her face looked peaceful, not happy exactly, but steady, strong, like she'd found something in that soil that the farm had never given her. She looked up when she heard his truck, and John watched her expression change. Not anger exactly, just guarded, careful. He climbed out slowly, his legs feeling weak, and walked toward her. She stood up, brushing dirt from her hands, waiting. "Linda," he started, his voice already breaking, "I didn't come to ask you back. I didn't come to beg you to forgive me, or to tell you I deserve another chance." She crossed her arms, her eyes steady on his face. "I only came to confess the truth," John continued, "to tell you everything, because you deserve to know why I was so blind, why I chose so wrong." And then he told her everything, about the letters in the shed, about his father's words, about Catherine and the lie that had shaped his entire life, about Evelyn's fear and manipulation, about the fake illnesses and the medicine bottle and Mr. Patterson seeing her at the market. The tears came, not the proud tears of a man trying to win sympathy, but the stripped-down, honest tears of someone drowning in remorse. "You tried to tell me," he said, his voice raw. "You saw what I couldn't see, and I cast you out for it. I chose a lie over the woman I loved, and His voice broke completely. "I don't know how to forgive myself for that." Linda stood there listening, her face unreadable. The garden bloomed around them, flowers she'd planted with her own blistered hands, and John wondered if she'd built a new life so beautiful that there was no room left in it for him. "I'm not asking for anything," he whispered. "I just needed you to know the truth. You deserved that much." The silence stretched between them like the distance of all those months apart. Faced with the man who abandoned her, will Linda use her hard-won strength to forgive, or will she choose to walk forward alone, leaving the past buried where it belongs? Linda stood there in that garden, looking at John with tears streaming down his face, and for a long moment she said nothing, just looked at this man who'd broken her heart, who'd chosen fear over love, who'd cast her out into the rain. Then, quietly, she said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." John nodded, turned to leave, knowing he'd said what he came to say. But as he took those first steps away, Linda called out, "John!" He stopped, turned back. "The truth doesn't erase the pain," she said, "but it helps me understand it. And understanding, that's the first step toward healing." She didn't invite him back, didn't say she forgave him, just acknowledged his honesty, and that was enough, for now. Months passed. Linda's garden grew into something remarkable, a real business that drew people from neighboring towns. She sold flowers, vegetables, taught gardening classes to folks who needed hope, the same way she once had. One Saturday morning, John's truck pulled up again. This time he wasn't crying. He walked up carrying a small pot with a single flower, something rare and beautiful that he'd spent months cultivating himself. "Linda," he said, his voice firm but humble, "may I help plant this?" She looked at the flower, then at him. His eyes were different now, clearer, like he'd walked through fire and come out the other side. She saw something there she'd never seen before, a man who'd done the hard work of facing himself. Linda smiled, a real smile, and pointed to an empty patch of soil near the garden's center. Together they knelt down in the dirt. Their hands, both calloused now from hard work, both carrying scars, worked side by side, creating a small hole in the damp earth. John carefully lifted the flower from its pot, and Linda guided it into place. Together they packed the soil around it, their fingers brushing, working as one. It was simple, just planting a flower, but it meant everything. This wasn't built on illusion anymore, or on fear, or on lies passed down through generations. This was built on truth, painful, hard-earned truth, on faith that had been tested and survived, on respect that came from seeing each other clearly, scars and all. As they stood up, brushing dirt from their knees, the sun broke through the clouds overhead, bathing that blooming garden in golden light. Their hands were dirty with soil, but their hearts had been cleansed by pain, by honesty, by the courage to forgive themselves and each other. Even the driest ground, when watered with tears and hope, can bring forth new life. And sometimes, the most beautiful flowers grow from the deepest wounds. This story isn't just about John and Linda. It's about every single one of us who's ever been trapped by fear, who's ever let someone else's manipulations blind us to the truth, who's ever had to rebuild from the ground up after losing everything. How many of us are living in our own prisons right now, built not with bars but with guilt, with obligation, with the fear of disappointing someone who's been controlling us all along? How many times have we cast out the people who truly loved us because we were too scared to see the truth? Here's what I want you to ask yourself tonight. Are you living your life or someone else's version of what your life should be? Are the people demanding your loyalty truly as helpless as they claim? Or have you just been too afraid to look closely at the medicine bottles hidden in their drawers? And if you've been the one cast out, if you're the Linda standing in the rain right now, remember this: even the driest soil can bloom again. Your hands might be blistered, your heart might be broken, but that doesn't mean your story is over. Sometimes the garden you build after everything falls apart becomes more beautiful than anything you had before. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories that will challenge you, move you, and maybe, just maybe, give you the courage to face your own truth. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to continue watching more powerful stories of redemption, transformation, and the strength it takes to bloom again after the storm. Your life is waiting. Are you brave enough to plant new seeds,